welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is your host, Maureen Spielman, and today I am already thrilled to be sitting down with Therese Rowley, PhD. She's the CEO of Accelerated Alignment. She's a skilled intuitive healer, speaker, author, and educator. Um, I couldn't even take all the time to read this bio because it's so long and extensive, and I know that you wear so many hats, but the one that we're going to kind of be delving into today is this idea of your work around providing intuitive insight to parents of intuitively and spiritually gifted children, helping them better understand and practically support the kids. You are also the executive producer of the DVD, The Misdiagnosis of Gifted Children. And you have a book called Mapping a New Reality, Discovering Intuitive Intelligence. And there's a 2-part video series on intuition as intelligence that goes with this. So there's a lot of body of work that we can refer to that I always put in the show notes, Dr. Rowley. But I want to say too that you have your own method called the Rowley method for reading and healing in the quantum field. And that's developed from your work, facilitating over 12,000 intuitive readings and healings. So really a huge thank you and welcome for being here today.
Oh, it's an honor, Maureen. Always fun to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
So fun. You came to me, you just discovered 9 years ago. I thought it was around 10, so it was in the ballpark. And it was when I had received your name from a friend who said maybe Dr. Rowley would be nice for you to talk to because I had questions about one of my children. And so even 9 years ago, I remember going down to your office in downtown Chicago. I remember the day clearly. And I sat with you for just a really expansive reading about my child. And it gave me gifts, tools, gifts for me to understand him, tools. It was just like, I would say back then, because he was younger, just a different lens through which to see him, which I have in so many years, it's always been a touch point for me because I have a feeling that children are coming in looking wildly different than they did in the past.
Oh.
And I'm always curious about this conversation, and you have so much to say about it. So first, I mean, one of my beginning questions was, and you may start wherever you want, but how did this become an area of interest for you?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking because it came in a little bit differently than you would think. I wasn't aiming for this whole the whole population of kids. What happened is that I was working in business. I was doing large scale change with a lot of leaders, and I was always helping them to align their inner world with their outer world. So what were they doing at a soul level, and how was what was going on in the corporation really prompting their growth in that area? And so sometimes I would do readings for them and I would find that they had stresses. And sometimes I would say, this isn't related to work. And a couple of times I said, tell me about your children. And they would start to talk about their children. And then I began to look at the whole energy field of children. And it was quite interesting. Many of them had capacities that were not common among adults. And many of them had diagnoses. And I began to see that some of the diagnoses were related in my book to intuitive intelligence. And so that's how I began to get very curious about this area. And I ended up at a conference that was for new children. And I don't even know quite how I got there. And I ended up talking to people who were doing a film on the misdiagnosis of gifted children and adults by a guy named Jim Webb, who wrote the book on it. And these guys wanted to actually do a major motion picture on it. And so at the time, I ended up being an executive director on this misdiagnosis of gifted children. And then I ended up with a license to it. I have no idea how that all unfolded because that wasn't where I was going. So this area felt like it was asking me to go there. And yes. I was not only fascinated, but these children are extraordinary. So I felt honored to be part of it.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a fascinating story of just I think you were just saying before we hit record that this spiritual path is laid out before us. And so that those doors opened and you went in that direction. And it's a fascinating area to be looking at. I think especially now in 2023, but it reminds me too that there's been people tapping into these intelligences or what is happening within children and the gifts that they're here coming with. Something, well, I guess I'll start with the question of how would one know, because the way that's in your bio, so correct me if there's a better way to say this, but how would one know if a child was spiritually or intuitively gifted, or there was something there to take a look at?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, what the children are teaching us now is that every one of us has a different way of learning. And so I'll start there because our entire education system, and Sir Ken Robinson has wonderful videos on this on YouTube, it kills creativity, and it talks about the norm as though that's a good thing to strive for. And the norm is the lowest possible bar you can do in life is to try to be normal. That's the lowest possible bar. And yet we're setting it up as the one that, well, because your child isn't normal, basically, you've got to do this to get them to be normal. Instead of saying, what if every single child had their own purpose, which they do, and their path to expressing and developing that purpose has nothing to do with the system you've created in the past to try to get people to be normal. So from the start, from the get-go, it's more about the system than it is about the children. We have to follow children because the evolution of the planet is a fact, and that every generation should be in a different place because the brain development should be bequeathed. There's at Harvard, they did a whole series of experiments on rats where they electrified a maze so that the rats who would ordinarily go towards the light, if they did that, they would get electric shocks. So they ended up going to the dark. And they did this generation after generation. This guy's name was McDougall that did the research. And by the time the 11th generation came, the mice, the rats were going specifically to the dark right away. And I probably have that reversed. They usually go to the dark and then they went to the light. In any case, by the 11th generation, they went opposite of the instinct that they had because every generation is bequeathing something to the next. And so when we get to these generations, not only that, but there's a spiritual evolution. There's a sort of a saying that says the Holy Spirit reveals itself through history. In other words, there's a revelation, and each generation brings some kind of revelation that should not be what we've known before. So these children show up as they should be in evolution, and we say, oh no, they're not normal, which means I don't feel safe because that's not how I understand life and what expression and development should look like as a parent or as a school system or as a world. And so I don't have any enabling structures to help them develop. So I want to start with that because I think the children are showing up to show us what it looks like in the next evolution. And we're just saying, well, that's not okay, and start from there. Right?
Yes. To me, this is very powerful, and thanks for sharing it. It's a message that is I've heard. Okay, like you even take the preface of every individual has their unique blueprint and reason for being, gifts that they have to share, and I think that those it's such a worthy concept to revisit over and over and over again because you begin to understand it more deeply. Like we might say that sort of like on a topical level, but to really believe it at almost like in a place of embodiment, like, okay, are we really going to hold this as truth? It starts to, it can hold more promise for kids. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And
yeah.
to reinforce to children that every child has a reason for being here. They're called here. They're invited to be themselves and to find out what it is in them that brings them joy. What is it that they find that they can that inspires them and that almost prompts them to express their greatest joy? That's why they're here. And if every child knows that, then we say, how can we support you in that? That's why I think so many people are homeschooling these days, because the system is simply inadequate to support the gifts the children come to bring. And the parents are wise enough and have the capacity to do that, so that the children can be reinforced for their gift and not in an environment that punishes them for having that in a way that's different than the norm, right?
Right.
Or that has, I'm especially, some of these IEPs especially get to me, because I think, well, every child needs an IEP. How do you learn? How do you take a test? I didn't take tests well. I don't know about you, but I was terrible on test taking. But if you give me an essay, I could get an A every time, because I could say, well, it kind of works this way, and it also can work. I can make arguments for both sides, because my brain
Right.
actually is synergistic, which is another intelligence that no one measures, because IQ is related to rational intelligence, which is one of, as Howard Gardner puts it, he names 11 intelligences. And now, we have Goldman, who said emotional intelligence is important. That wasn't even in Howard Gardner's list of, hey, it isn't just this, it's all these. And he said, and by the way, emotional intelligence is there. And we've now found out that emotional intelligence is more important to leadership success than academic intelligence, IQ. So if that's the case, then, and we're finding out that these things we need to do in life, all of the roles that we have to do, are better served by intelligences that we don't even measure in school. How in the heck do we keep honoring the system that doesn't measure what we need for the success of the planet, right? And the success of our communities. So, and I think it's a signal to the system to reorganize and to find new ways to support and develop children who have new gifts.
And do you feel that, obviously it was an invitation for a reset of a lot of systems when we went through the pandemic? Have you seen any shift? Like, because I feel like what you're saying too, I heard you the other day say this, the term, and it can mean one thing, it can mean different things, I'm not sure, but like this worldview, because when you describe a universe where children are fostered from a young age to tap into what is your giftedness, then I see like this population, just like it's very abundant. It's not, I'm wondering, like, do you see a worldview like that, or what does that worldview look like for you?
Right. So even in business, we say either there's just one pie with specific segments, and when you take mine, I have less, or we see innovation beginning to increase the pie and the size of the pie so that everybody can just have more. So the current system of education is reductive. It's very much about, this is what we have. If you don't get it, you're out. This is competition. You're not good enough. If we said everyone, our job is to explore what it means to have this gift, and then that person gets to expand their gifts and teach the system what else, so that there's an expansive universe, and we're responding and respecting that. We're responding to that and respecting that. So I worked with the YWCA for several years in helping them to move from a nonprofit to a social enterprise. And I worked with a woman named Dory McWhorter, who was the CEO. And it was really about, how do we, for example, the people that worked with trauma, because they were working with kids who had a great deal of trauma, or the parents, and they would get secondary trauma from that, counselors. But their job, as they thought about it, was to help this person get back to normal, get back to survivability, right? To get back to the place where they could at least find the ground under them. So what we did is, and I was in a big 200-person workshop on this, and I said, but what if your job was to see trauma as leverage for finding someone's essential gifts and connecting them to opportunity? What if trauma is prelude to breakthrough, not for survivability, but for thriving? And that's the paradigm that I'm talking about back in the education system. What if it was not about getting the right grades to get to the next level, to get to the next level, to get more money, to get to the next level? But what if, and in competition with each other, but what if we were teaching each other about what's possible in the creative process in expanding the world? Look at the problems we have, the complex problems we have. These kids are here they have to solve these complex problems, or the planet won't exist, right? Or the planet will at least will go down for the count on the planet. So they have to have the freedom to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
beyond the known solutions that we have present to us. And if they don't have the freedom or even the capacity within themselves to trust that that's what their job is, or that that's what they have the license to do, because we acknowledge that and validate it, then they say, oh, I'm just not good enough.
Yeah.
Well, what a waste of life. And
Mm-hmm.
in other
Mm-hmm.
words, like, how about what, there's all these things we don't even know how to cross-disciplinary solutions that are there. We don't even know them, but you will, because we're going to let you explore everything. And
Yeah.
we want you to tell us as you explore it, what occurs for you,
Yeah.
right? So that we want to
Mm-hmm.
learn from them. They're the leaders for the next generation. We want to foster that and foster that confidence in them that that's what they're here to do.
Oh, yeah. I'm just thinking, well, I'm going to the public school system right now because so many of us have kids in the public school system. So you're kind of working, if you believe in this, which this is my worldview that you're speaking of, and it's giving me more knowledge, more momentum, more energy around it. So I thank you for that, even sort of mid interview, because it's the messages that obviously you have to be a receptor for them, but then it does, I'm thinking about like the messages coming into the public schools. Like, where do you see, I want to talk about like some ways to help transform, or is it not going to the school? Is it working on an individual level, working within family systems? How do you do your work first and foremost? And then maybe we'll get to some of the other things.
Yeah, I mean, and I think because every person has a specific, their creative purpose within them. Some people have an orientation, and I talk about 3 different levels of orientation, and one is uniqueness, and that is the reference to oneself, because some people are doing something that's very unique, and they need to feed that so that the world can share it. Let's talk about Monet or Renoir. How do they feed their gifts so we can share in the result of what they do? And then there's the people that are we, and that's more you and I, community. I learn through relationships. We talk a lot. There's social aspects. I need that. I thrive on it. And then there's people who are unity people, who are thinking and asking questions such as, what's my mission in the world, and how can I make the greatest impact? They're not talking about we or I, they're talking about the world and how do I take care of the world? So everybody has a different orientation. So when it comes to saying, well, what do I do, for example, to influence the system that my child is in, you have to be respectful and honor the orientation that you have, and not try to do something that isn't in because that isn't yours to do. If it isn't your joy, it isn't yours to do. So if you have a, even this collective thing, I remember going to, when my daughter's also in public schools, and I went to the teacher and I said, well, could we my daughter has this going on. Could we find a way to work with lots of different, like we had counselors, we had maybe a teacher involved, we had an administrator, and said, what if we set something up that would help all the kids in this sort of way? So I took what I knew was going on for her and I broadened it to understand that a lot of kids at her level might have something similar. So how could we accommodate that? So that's just something that I thought to do, and it did. Well, it was good and it worked, but someone else might just say, let me help the teacher understand how my child works. Right. So I mean, I remember telling the teacher, my child knows how to be safe because she uses her words a lot. And if she's not talking, she doesn't feel safe. So when she talks a lot, it means she's trying to feel safe, or she doesn't in that moment and she's working on it. So don't punish her for talking too much. Just help her find a structure that's okay in, because that'll make her feel safe. So then the teacher has a clue then, right? So whatever we understand about our children, we can help the teacher with, or if we're systems oriented, we can go to the principals and start working on other models, which I also did, bring in other models. But what I'm doing when I'm reading children is that I'm looking at their energetic matrix. I'm looking at what did they come to do, and how are they related to the parents, and what's the relationship, so that I can elucidate that and help parents see their children differently and therefore serve them differently. Because the idea is that if my child is acting out, for example, and they keep acting out, and I'm not in a good place anyway, maybe my spouse and I are not having a good time, and I'm trying to be a good mom or a good dad, and I'm telling this child, everything's fine, and why are you acting out? And I get upset about that. Well, what we don't know is that child is taking on the unspoken feelings of the parents who are not acknowledging to the child what's true.
Yes.
So the child is
Uh-huh.
experiencing dissonance. The mom or
Mm-hmm.
dad's going, no, everything's fine, honey. And the
Mm-hmm.
child's thinking everything's not fine. And their nervous system is going, this now there's really something wrong. Not only wrong because there's something wrong, but something wrong because mom doesn't know or dad doesn't know there's something wrong. And they're telling me a lie. They can
Mm-hmm.
feel that energetically. So now they're acting out of the unspoken feelings, and then they
Yes.
get punished. So, I mean, that just understanding that one from an intuitive standpoint, if I can help someone say, well, here's some words that you might use if you want to consider to talk to your child about what's going on so that they get coherence, because children respond better to coherence between what they see and what they feel.
Yeah.
And then
Mm-hmm.
they're a little more settled, and then we find words to help them through sin. Then they don't have to act out of what's not theirs. So
Yeah.
that's just an example of.
Yeah, that's a great example. Have you seen a shift? Because that reminds me of, I'd say, one of my children experiences where when it's detected that like the truth isn't being told out loud and there's some suppression of like, oh, everything's fine, that he will come and say, no, that's not acceptable to me. And he'll be the one stepping into more of an adult role. But do you
Mhm.
see that with more and more kids, that it's almost like as they're breaking through, that there's less tolerance for old ways?
Well, less tolerance for non-truth telling,
Hmm.
especially if they're old souls.
Hmm.
My daughter once said, I said, you know, your job is to obey me. You're a kid. She goes, well, she thought about it. She said, I do obey you if I think it's a good idea. If I agree with you. I'm like what?
Yes. Yeah, so
And so,
intelligent.
yeah, I mean, they're just like, you can't. And so to respect the wisdom and to say, you know, like, to acknowledge, oh, so you feel like that's not true. Tell me about what you think. And just to
Oh,
give them the
yep.
space to express it instead of saying, well, I know that, but you know, as I used to say to my child when she was like 2 or 3, I'd say, I'm the mama, you're the baby, I'm the boss of you. And she'd say, I'm the mama, you're the baby, I'm the boss of you. And she was like 2 years old. I'm like, oh, here's what I'm in for.
Exactly. And the way
Yeah,
so many of us were raised, that didn't really,
right.
it takes a reset. Um, I see this part of the parent in here. And if we're in any sort of system, but I'm thinking, because we're talking about kids in the school system, that knowing, like, let's say someone were to go to you and get information about their child, then there's that intermediary step where a parent really truly believing in that and bringing it to the system, which we may have put almost like hierarchical above us. Like there can feel like fear in that, like speaking your child's truth, your family's truth, your truth. So that's also a new sort of, I don't know if you'd call it, it's a way of being. I was going to say, is it an archetype of like this person that's going to stand up for the truth in the parental role as well?
Right. I think that's really about understanding as parents that we chose this time in history to come in and be a different kind of advocate for our child so that the system can eventually evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And we can do that by acknowledging that, you know, and I said this to a lot of teachers, I don't even know how you can do what you do. You know, I don't even know, you know, how you have the patience to get through it with all that is on your plate. And I need to let you know about my child because, you know, I have to advocate for my child. It's important. So I appreciate everything you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
we can talk about this, but I need a different strategy for how this is working so that you can acknowledge and honor the work that's being done there, that's honestly being done in another paradigm. Like, and the people in the system are working according to the system to the very best of their ability. And most
Mm-hmm.
of them are heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are heroes that are trying to accommodate differences while being told that there's a system that doesn't honor differences.
Yeah.
And they're working both at the same time. So I really have a huge respect for teachers, period. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there are teachers where I've said, yeah, I don't even want my daughter exposed to that
Right.
mindset. You know, I mean, I
Yes.
literally said that. Like, yeah, no, it's not okay for you to say that to my daughter. But on the main, they're all like, I think they're 99% heroes, and we need to acknowledge that as we
Yes.
present our
Well,
side.
I think that that's right, and I'm so happy that you gave that sort of acknowledgement and appreciation for the heroes, the teachers. If you had a message for the teachers who are in the classrooms, they're seeing all these different presentations of the kids like coming forward, which I imagine is quite overwhelming. I totally agree with you. I know that's not my work to do, but is there a message at this time that you would send to them, or a way to look at when you're dealing with this collective of children within a classroom?
I can't imagine being uh, put upon, being told that my job is very much about measuring children as they're developing, period. So first of all, that I don't know how they do that, and they do that, and they do it well. And they do it with a lot of things that represent both the unfairness of a subjective system as well as,
Mhm.
pardon me, people's reaction to it. And so I would say that the teachers are really, I think of it as nurses. Nurses were the healers, not the doctors,
Mhm.
because they could spend a little time with the patient and they could touch their arm, or they could comfort them, or they could see what was going on an emotional level and connect to it. But now they're told they have 10 to 15 minutes per patient, and here's the drugs they need to give, and don't tell them about that, and don't talk to them about that. That's why they're all quitting in droves. They didn't come to be pill
Yeah.
pushers. They came to be healers. The same thing with teachers. They didn't come to get into some standardization so that the kid could be normal. They came to teach children to develop. They came
Mhm.
to foster their development. So
Mhm.
I would say, that the teachers already have what they have, and it is about they connect with children's hearts. And when they connect with their hearts in the moment, they're
Mhm.
trying to give them what they need and help them develop through what they can sense is going on. And most of the teachers are doing that. And then they have to be put upon on the system that says, never mind that. What about our measurements? So, and granted, there has to be some systemic connection to fostering that development, but there's so many alternative schools now that are understanding how to bring children to a better place of knowing their gifts and developing them in the process of school, that don't have to do the same system. So I would just say to teachers, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I get it. You were there to foster the development of the growing of our children's development through their heart. And that is what makes you a great teacher. And if you
I
keep
love it.
focusing on that, everything comes from that.
Mm. Beautiful reflection. That's going to speak to a lot of people, and even for parents in these systems, just to know that about teachers is a great. It's great information. I am thinking then how we talked about, just as we met last week about the topic, um, how we're also conditioned to look at things then the way a child is coming into the earth being as, and if it doesn't fit the system, it's a disorder. And so we kind of, let's talk about that, because I think that there's some gold therein for how we view what we're seeing, a disorder versus a gift.
Right. Excuse me. And some of this came as uh, I worked with a pediatrician at one point, and sometimes he would just give me a child and say, talk to me about what you see here. And he was also a Chinese medicine physician, duly certified. And I would look at the child and say, this isn't about the child, it's about the mother. And the mother's, and the mother's got this, and here's what's going on. And so that would be helpful in his helping the child. But we started to then I said, a lot of times I was defining what I saw, and I wanted to do a study on this. We presented it to Lurie Children's Hospital, but it didn't quite make it through. But the idea was to say, if I could quote unquote energetically diagnose the children while he did it medically, and he would call something perhaps an ADHD or an ADD according to the behaviors that the child was exhibiting. And I would look at the child energetically, and we would compare, and we would see if there was a critical mass of data that showed there was a parallel between the diagnosis of one kind and the intuitive intelligence of another. So I'll give you an example of this. Children with ADHD are often said to be not able to pay attention for long periods of time, that they can't sequence things, that they can't ground, and that they're hyperactive. And so some of those behaviors are present in those diagnoses. What I see when I look at many of those children, and I haven't done enough study to say that I have I'm qualified to say this, but the question, the hypothesis I have about this, that I would love to get into a legitimate study, is that they have wide open third eyes. So they come in with capacities for clairvoyance, which means clear seeing, which is located in the middle of the two eyes and down from the crown of the head. And the function of the third eye is to see things in neutrality. Now, I'm going to say see the truth in neutrality, to look at something and see the truth in neutrality. But this function comes through pictures, images, symbols, visions, dreams. It does not come through sounds. It does not come through feeling. It does not come through knowing. It comes through a picture, like a movie, without any sound. Sometimes without any knowing, just the picture. Sometimes you get the impression of the picture and you know. So the other thing that the third eye can do is to see multidimensional realities, as opposed to the two eyes see physical, and the third eye can see multidimensionally. So in quantum physics, particle physics has proven that there's 7 realities going on simultaneously. Quantum physics tells us there's at least 11 that they have in their theories for their own math, but particle physics doesn't care. The string theory in quantum physics says that it's all connected. The particle physicists are more mathematicians. They couldn't care less about all that nonsense. They want to prove things with math. So those guys put together a math thing, and they were the ones that said there's 7-dimensional realities they can prove mathematically. So now you're looking at the third eye, and you're looking at, well, from quantum physics, at least 7-dimensional realities. A child may be brought in and be able to see multidimensional realities through their third eye, and their eyes wide open and looking at it. Now, what happens when you look at a picture, and let's say you're staring at a picture, let's say it's just one picture, and you say to somebody, okay, please sequence this picture and tell me what's most important and what's the priority. And you're thinking, it's a picture. There's nothing priority. I could say that guy's a priority because I like him, or I could say that one's prominent, but is that the one that's supposed to? So kids are so, that's a perception that they're having, and it's a receptor site for the stimuli that comes in. So their stimuli comes in, it may come in just in one picture, and they can't sequence it. And people say, what's wrong? You're not normal. You can't sequence things. Well, they can't sequence it because they're looking through pictures. That's why we started to help children learn things through their particular strength. Even if you don't have my gifts to be able to see that, you can say, my child is, and I have a relative that's that has this, could look at a play or a television program or video and memorize it the first time through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, absolutely embody it. That's someone with the wide open third eye. Now, when they're looking multidimensionally, there are children, and I've talked to a guy who has a boy, I think it was a boys' school in Canada, and he was at a psychic kids conference I went to, and I talked to him, and he started the school, and he says because he was one of the counselors at the school, and the kids would come be given to him like, here, you've misbehaved, go to the counselor. Mm-hmm. And he would say, why aren't you paying attention? And the kid would say, well, I don't like what's going on in China. Now, these kids, he had like no access to papers or internet at the time or anything. He said, what do you mean what's going on in China? Well, all of the people are in trouble and they're all doing this. And he would describe it completely. And then he would go do research and find out that in that moment, that was going on in China, that there was a terrible disruption. It was on the news, blah, blah, blah. This kid didn't know it. So here's this kid having feelings about something that's not even local, that he doesn't know about. And now it's like, why can't you sit still? Mm-hmm. What's wrong with you? Mm-hmm. You're not an A student because you can't see. And so they say he's not paying attention. And I said, oh, he's paying attention in more ways than you have the capacity to do. You have no idea how he's paying attention. So it's not whether he's paying attention, it's what he's paying attention to, that mm-hmm. we have to be more compassionate and astute and discerning about asking, what are you paying attention to? Not that you're not paying attention to me. What is it that's, and mm-hmm. sometimes it's just an overwhelm that happens because there's so much going on in their receptor site that they can't organize it in a way or process it until they're in their 20s. The cerebral cortex doesn't formulate a capacity to sort, look at impacts in the future, look at what might happen until their 20s. Mm-hmm. That's why they say, I heard this one policeman say that 16-year-old boys are the dumbest creatures on the planet because they have all this energy, all this strength, all this smarts, but they can't make leaps and look at the consequences. Yes. So they end up running into things, like, oh, and that means that. Oh, yeah. But it's because of it's a brain capacity. So these children, let's say with that wide open third eye, they're diagnosed with something and then they're given drugs. The drugs will not help them develop that capacity. It will not help them to get better, but it will mask their sensation of the stimuli coming into their receptor site so they don't notice it's coming in. It doesn't stop it from coming in. It just dulls their awareness of it. It's just like taking ibuprofen or aspirin. It'll dull your pain, the feeling of pain. The pain's still there, right? So that's what's happening with the same thing with the drugs. They'll stop the pain of overwhelm, but it won't stop the developmental pathway. It won't help that. So if we could, and there's my bucket list, teach children that that's an intuitive gift and that they can be at choice for how the aperture of what they're looking at in their third eye. In other words, if they imagined a third eye in the middle of their head and they imagined there was an eyelid, they close the eyelid and then look at things. And what would that be like? And I do this with students in the classes when I teach my method in healing in the quantum field and reading, that you are at choice for what you perceive through your intuitive receptor sites, but not unless you know you have one, that it's a gift and how it works. Absolutely. And then you can have choice, right? So if we could teach the kids, oh, you can open it up and you can close it down and let's see what this is. What is that like for you, right? And the basics of that, or the basics of their energy field, where they don't know that they're spreading their energy out inside of an entire room and they're aware of every thought, every feeling that everybody's having, and they don't know how to process that. Then they quote unquote act out of it because it's overwhelming, right? And people are like, oh, this kid overwhelmed, give him a drug, you know, like, and I don't think anybody's parents that cavalier, because they're just trying, every parent is just trying to help their child feel safe and be safe, right? And be able to even live in this society where it's all competition with a child that's very amazingly gifted in a way that is not honored. So what else, what other choice do they have? I always say, and sometimes I can see what medication does on a field, and I can see that sometimes it's helpful to bridge where they are to where they need to be. Sometimes that just brings a little bit of balance. And sometimes it just completely dulls down, which is why I did the, produced with Jen Weigel, the misdiagnosis of gifted children, because children are being diagnosed over the phone in 15 minutes by a physician about, here, have a class 3 drug, and that'll be fine because you're acting out. And that is, it's entirely unethical and inappropriate because the child, there are pediatricians who are they deal with the psychology of the children, and they do battery of tests, and they may decide at the end of that it's helpful for them to, for example, be in a more challenging school. Some are acting out because they're not challenged enough, because their IQ is too high for what's being offered to them, and so they're acting out. And then others are having a chemistry imbalance based on some of their intuitive intelligence and some other things. So it's a much more complex time, because the children are showing us the evolution, and we're kind of between times of where we've been and where we're going. Yeah. And they're all over the place. Chaos precedes order, right? So we're in this chaotic place, and all of us need to be just responsible to our own children to sort through what are their gifts, and asking the question, what are their gifts, instead of asking the question, what's wrong with them?
It's a great premise. Yeah. And I was, one of my questions, like my sub questions about the medications, is that sometimes if a child then reports, and I guess we don't know, but if a child then reports like, oh, I feel better, or I'm more attuned, or there could be, like you're saying, like some intersectionality, like some bridge, but it also can be that, this is just a question, but the child's already learning what it takes to be as part of the system. So then there's a misidentification that it's working because it's creating that puzzle piece to fit the current system, the current puzzle. But
I mean, they're selling, the kids are smart enough to sell Adderall and Ritalin. They're selling it to each other, because if you're going to pass a test and you have to stay up all night here, this isn't about their behavior. This is about the system. And it's a shame that they have to conform to that in order to conform to a system that doesn't work anymore. They have to drug themselves. How sick is that system? You have to wonder if the medicine belongs for the system instead of for the child. It's the system that's sick, not the child. So it is a shame, but we're discovering this, and the kids will help us with this as they go on.
I think this gives a lot of sort of I'm going to just call it permission, but an area to explore for parents, because as we're talking about all this too, it's, if we were to sit into our intuition as parents, of what we know about our child, we probably have like a nice list of this is what I know. But then
Yeah.
it's the belief system of like, and these are okay, and there's a place for this, and this is also this can create a beautiful life's path for this individual.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I've had parents come to me and say, we're moving to Montana or we're moving to this or that. Why? Because my child is sensitive to the 5G towers that they
Uh,
know are completely toxic to the brain.
yeah.
And I always recommend people get safe protection, safe spaceprotection.com products that will stop the radiation from
Mhm.
hurting the brains of the children who are sensitive, because
Yeah.
all the radiation that comes through computers and,
Mhm.
when you open your
Mhm.
computers and it says what networks are available, all of the electromagnetic fields
Yeah.
of what's available are already coming at you. And
Oh,
we've
that's
never in
good.
history had this kind of thing on our brains. So we need to have at least some things that help to mitigate that. But yeah, it's a really interesting
I
time.
like that. That I just want to ask a question around that. How you, as an intuitive, a healer, a guide, uh, talk to family, if you do at all, about technology and its role with our children.
Yeah, I have in specific readings, and sometimes I've done a couple of conferences and for parents, but basically the idea that it's very interesting because now I see people with 1 year olds just here's the computer in
Mhm.
front of you and I'm going
Mhm.
to be gone for a bit. That's okay. And I understand as a parent how 24/7 with a child, you're trying to find something that's doable.
Mhm.
Uh, but there are consequences for exposing a child to this a great deal of radiation from these devices, especially before they're two. There are those screens now that they have, pardon me, that go over the computer, and there are things on the back of the phones you can put in. Again, safe space protection, uh, safespaceprotection.com.
Mhm.
And I know the woman that started that, and she's an amazing scientist as well as an intuitive. And you can put it on the back of the phone and it'll stop the radiation. I see people putting their phone to their ear. Oh, bad idea for the brain.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I see women putting it right here now, like next to their sports bra. And they've done studies and found breast cancer exactly outlining where they put the phone against their
Mhm.
breast.
Mhm.
That's radiation. It's going
Mhm.
into the brain, it's going into the body. Their children are being exposed. So separating, like having distance between themselves and the device, putting those screens on that stop the radiation or reduce it quite a bit are really
Yeah.
helpful if you're going to do that. Also, with kids, there's so much violence in videos that it's not helpful to their brain is developing either.
Mhm.
Because, and I went into a video store once, and this is before it was so widespread. And I said, is there anything in here that is educational without explicit sex or violence in any way? And the owner of this thing went, and he's looking around, he goes, I don't think so.
Mhm.
I said, these are for kids.
Yeah.
So when we have to go to places like, there are places like Heart Math. Heart Math is an institute that helps kids go into alpha brainwave by doing games and
Mhm.
helps them calm down. So you have to research a little bit on conscious products for
Okay.
children.
Mhm.
So, and then some kids need the weighted blankets and all of that sort of things because they need to feel the skin on them because they're very uh, high vibrating children and they're very sensitive and they need to feel skin on them. So they need to feel something weighted. But as far as technology goes, whatever is helpful on a conscious level that you can
Mhm.
find. And I used to do a lot of research on that and far and few between, but it's growing that
Okay.
area. I
Yeah.
mean, I would even go to Gaia. Gaia has a lot of other resources. I don't know how well they do with children and technology, but it's worth looking at. The 5G towers, if it's near you, absolutely need to safe space protection for the room that takes the toxic radiation out of the room. Put it in your
Mhm.
child's room. Do not let your child have a cell phone next to their bed. Do not let them have a television at night. They have to cut it off at a certain time because that really hurts the brain. I mean, they were developing, the brains are
Yeah.
developing and they're trying to
Mhm.
accommodate all this radiation all day long. So we have never had in history this experiment
Yeah.
where children are exposed to radiation at this level, even walking down the street every 5 minutes, and especially in an urban city setting.
Yep.
They've already shown the toxicity of 3G towers, and now they're in 5G. They didn't even do the studies because they
Wow.
knew it was toxic and everybody
Yep.
just wanted faster devices. So they didn't do the
Mhm.
study. So
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to be a parent these days with technology because
It
it's so
is.
prevalent,
Yeah.
but
Mm-hmm.
there are ways. So those are
And
a few of them.
it's good conversation. It's good reminders because in some ways there's so much concern, but there can also be a numbing out because it's so big. It's so big. And but there's the radiation piece and then this constant barrage of ideas, images, overload coming at our children too, which I have to assume is not healthy for them.
Right. And well,
Mhm.
and this is what's gonna happen is they're gonna have to adapt.
Mhm.
It's about one of the things that's going to happen is resilience and adaptation are the two skills that are going to be necessary for them to survive.
Yeah.
If we can't help our children pivot and we as parents have to say, how does it feel? We keep having to
Yeah.
ask the children, how does that feel to you
Love
when
that.
that happens? Because the
Yes.
children will numb their feelings out a way big time. If they have to be what social media tells them to be and they can't be that, then they'll isolate. We've got
Mhm.
COVID, they isolated, they've got their
Mhm.
device, they isolate,
Mhm.
they don't, their relationship goes down. So we can keep saying, how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
How do
Mhm.
you feel? Not what do you think, but how do you feel about that?
Yes.
When that
Yeah.
happens, what can you tell us about that? Do you think your peers feel the same way about that?
Yeah.
Because that just helps them to open their heart and ask the question of themselves. Of course, a lot of kids at a certain age will say, "I got to tell you how I feel." You're the parent, I'm not going to tell you how you feel. But if you can, anything that you can do to enhance their, uh, when you see your child, you know when they're happy, you know
Mhm.
when they expand, you know when they're, you know, and anything that you can do watching something together where you know the point of the movie is touching,
Yeah.
or you know that you go to do a certain thing and they get delighted.
Mhm.
Anything you can do to
Mhm.
amplify that in their lives and keep pointing back to it and referring back to it and referring back to it keeps reminding their system that there's a place where joy lives and they
Yes.
can live in that through both memory and recreating it in new ways. So I
Mm.
think that's really a core important aspect of reminding themselves that they can come from joy or at least remember to experience it during all this
Absolutely.
barrage.
Yeah, there's been so many good guidelines that you've set out for this talk today, Therese, as I know something I want to end with, but before we finish up, for everything that we've covered, is there anything that else that comes to mind for you that we've left out or that's important to say?
Okay, one thing I would say is that first of all, parents have to know if you've chosen to be a parent at this time in history, just call yourself a hero, full stop. And then honor yourself for that. And then get to the end of the day and go, I got to the end of my day.
Mm, mhm.
I'm going to invite spirit to just comfort me and to acknowledge my brilliance in having gotten through it. Even if I was out of sorts or I yelled or I did this and I wasn't supposed, hug yourself because you're picking the hardest job on the planet and you're
Yeah.
doing the absolute best you can. And it needs to be, no matter what you do, please don't judge yourself. It's a long process and it's a really challenging environment. And what a great job. No matter what, honor
Yeah.
yourself,
Mhm.
self-compassion. That would be the
Mhm.
message for
Oh,
parents.
it's so beautiful. That's a great message. I was going to add something onto the end, which is it's something that I've heard you say a couple times and I really love, and I think it would be beneficial for our listeners. But I've heard you say several times that you grow in the area that you persistently ask questions in. Can you just say something about that? I want to hear from you what that means and why it's kind of one of your, it feels like mantras or principles.
Yeah, it's a central tenet, and it comes out of appreciative inquiry, which is David Cooper created appreciative inquiry as a methodology in the 80s that looks at how we grow from our strength as opposed to looking at what's wrong. And his methodology is really worth looking up. But one of the tenets of his philosophy is that we grow in the direction we most persistently ask questions about. And when we ask persistent questions about what brings me joy or what's the best thing going on in my child or what's the best possible thing that can happen in this
Mm,
situation, our brain will go, our cerebral cortex goes towards the questions and tries to solve them. Well, if you try to solve questions like, where's my joy? You'll continue to find things in your environment that say, oh, there it is, there it is, there it is. If you continue to ask the question, what's wrong? Like they do in, the traditional psychology, you'll find out 10 more things that are wrong, and you'll just keep finding
mm,
out what's wrong. So
mhm.
I say always grow in the direction you most persistently ask questions about and make those questions about what's the best possible
Yeah.
outcome, the best possible way I could be in this situation, how's the best possible relationship I can have with my child, or
Mhm.
whatever whatever the situation is, keep asking about joy and your
Yeah.
brain will bring you there.
Yep. And I feel like when we ask that question, knowing that we're divinely supported and in that sort of mission or whatever it is, and it doesn't feel like either, maybe it's because I'm getting to know you more. It doesn't feel like there's any sort of bypassing of reality in that. It's not like, you know how like you can have the like, oh, just think positive thoughts. And it's not that. It feels more like a guiding question that like there's a path and it opens up different avenues if we are asking the most resonant question.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a practice. It's a practice like yoga or any other practice you want to do. It's a practice that will continue to shape your path towards that which is life is always inviting us to grow, and it's always inviting us to find our joy in it. Even when it's difficult and sorrowful, we can still say, wow, I get to feel this deeply, and that's a privilege, because some people can't even know that there's a place of growth here. They just feel the sorrow. They don't know that there's possibility for growth. So that's a place of gratitude. So what in life, how can we accept the invitation of life to say yes, accept the invitation that it will change and grow and be confusing and confounding, and still insist that we find our joy in it and ask that question.
I think that's a beautiful place to end the interview. I want to give you an opportunity to let the listeners know where to find you and any upcoming work you have.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I'm thank you again for spending time with me. It's been a really joyful time, and I'm grateful. I'm doing the workshop next Tuesday, pop-up workshop that on intuitively reading energy, and I'm going to focus on some intuitive empathic skills in that. And on the 21st, I guess this is just this Friday, I'm going to be at the Joao Brothers Art Center. Well, I'll be one of 77 practitioners at the Joao Brothers Art Center that's being presented, and it's called Energy Unlimited. And it's we were interviewed as people who were related to enhancing energy on the planet in whatever way we were. And so there's going to be a grand celebration. It's free. So look it up, Joao Brothers Art Center. And I'm going to have some classes in the fall on reading in energy in the quantum field and healing. So I hope people will tune into that. And I have my book, Mapping into Reality,
I love it.
Discovering Intuitive Intelligence. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here. And thanks for the listeners as always. And I'll put, you gave a lot of references today to both your own work and others' work. So I'll put as many as I can in the show notes so people can go and discover what really resonated with them. And we'll see the listeners next time. And thank you again, Dr. Rowley.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maureen.
Yes. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit maureenspielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.